Hi there. So I just wanted to go over some basic modeling stuff. This is only going to cover kind of the components that make up 3D meshes and duplicating and combining those primitives. So if I go in here and I have a polygon cube, you can also make that from the Create Polygon Primitive menu up here. You go into Cube. And if I hold right click over this, you can see that there's a bunch of different options. And every single mesh in Maya is, or polygon mesh that is comprised of these little points called vertices, or a vertex right there. So if I go into that mode, now you'll notice that it changed colors. When I'm in object mode and I'm affecting the entire piece of geo at once, you'll notice that it's highlighted green. But if I'm in vertex mode, you can see that it's highlighting these tiny verts to start selecting and start messing with. So if you go in and start selecting these, and you access your W move tool, I'm just pressing W right there to go into move, you kind of move those around and pull those whichever way you want. And in order to move multiple at one time, you can shift select to add to the selection, or I guess it's technically control shift, because shift really just inverts your selection. So notice this little vert right here. I'm holding shift and it's deselecting it now, but since it's unselected now and I hold shift and click it, it's going to select it. So if I do a click drag selection over this, normally it would select all of them, but if I only click drag over these and then I shift click drag over this, notice how it deselected those two and selected those ones. So that's really powerful for if you're, like, say you have a complex bottom of this piece of geo that you want to select and you want to get all the faces down there. If you hold right click and go into face mode, and I know yes, we could just click it like this, but there's easier, there's might be some scenarios where that's more annoying. So if you click drag over the rest of it and then just shift click drag over that, notice how it deselected all of that and selected the bottom face. Now be careful when you're selecting. Let me go back into vert mode. Be careful when you're selecting, drag selecting, because you might drag through, because it selects through your objects unless you have camera-based masking, and you might get points on the other side. This is really useful most of the time. Like if you had to pull an arm kind of further away from the body because you modeled it too close, then you could just drag select through all of it and feel free to move all of it at once. So that's verts selecting, and as always, Alt kind of does the, sorry, my bad. Control will deselect whatever you have, no matter what, right there, boom. So I'm just deselecting that. Now that's just all the selection aspects of it. But I want to go into these different components. So I mentioned that every single mesh, every single 3D object is made of verts that we were looking at and pulling around. And I went briefly into faces, but between those verts exists edges. So when you select these edges, you can kind of pull those around and pull multiple verts at one time, right? Now, edges, we're going to get a lot deeper into sort of the edge flow of things, but edges are very important, because if I just make a multicut here, and I double click this, notice how my selection, if I go into 4 wireframe mode, goes all the way around. So it goes all the way around that object. And we can scale that up, scale it down, boom, bang, all that stuff. So when you're dealing with edges, it's mostly if you have, it'll be an easier time to select this stuff. However, you can also go in and select the entire edge loop by clicking one vert and then shift double clicking that next one. Notice how that did essentially the same thing. I do like just double clicking one edge though. It just feels cleaner, feels faster. And then the last component that we're going to deal with today, because there are a few more components to these, such as UVs and normals. But the last component that we're dealing with is faces. So we have faces in here, and the it's essentially what the edge is to verts. This is what faces are to edges. So it's just all these edges kind of come together and are connected with this polygonal face. And this is a quad right here, right? Because it has 4 sides or 4 points. There's 4 verts in there, making that up. So that makes it a quad, right? Quad, quattro. If I had instead a face that looked like this, notice how I just cut it across there. It made a tri. So this is going to be important later when we get into it. But faces can have an absurd amount of points on it, right? So if I make a point right here, these are all tris. These are all tris because if I count up the verts, 1, 2, 3, that's a tri. 1, 2, 3, that's a tri. 1, 2, 3. So that's always, those are all tris. But notice how when I cut into this top one, let me just move it out for visual sake. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A 5-sided face. And since we're going to be working with characters, this is going to be the bane of our existence. You cannot have 5-sided faces. Mostly because a lot of programs don't support it, and they don't deform well when you're animating. So like say you're moving an arm around, this 5-sided face is going to kind of pull and stretch in really weird ways that when you render it out, it's going to look strange. So we don't like these. Additionally, remember how I cut that nice edge loop in there? The sort of geometry of these tris and 5-sided face setup, it does not subdivide or get multi-cut very easily. You can't insert edge loops across that. You can this way, which is kind of a newer Maya feature, I think, since probably like 2017 maybe, or 2018. I'm not sure. But normally in the past you wouldn't have been able to cut this face at all, but they've seemingly have kind of pumped up their tech a little bit, which is, kudos to Maya. But yeah, so those are the components there. I want to talk about deleting components now. So if I go into verts, if I press delete on this, notice how nothing happened, right? And you can only, that's only because you can only delete a vert if it has 2 edges connected to it. So this vert had 3 edges, right? 1, 2, 3. They're all connected to that vert. If I go into multi-cut, and we're going to go into multi-cut later, and just make one solitary vert out there, look how lonely and strange it looks. I can still move it around, but I also have a 6-sided face and a 5-sided face down here, so this is just no good. But since I only have 2 edges connected to it, I can just feel free to delete that bad boy right there. And now the same goes for edges, right? I can go in here, delete this edge, right? And it got rid of all of that. But that same rule of like the verts staying behind is true. Let me delete this. So I deleted all those edges over there, but notice how it left behind this vert. So if you do that, you're gonna have to delete the vert as well. Let me go back. So the same is true if I delete this edge loop right there. It'll leave behind those verts. However, if I control delete, boom, got rid of those verts immediately. Didn't have to worry about them anymore. And faces, you can delete those as well at any time you wish. Say I didn't like this 5-sided face because I don't. Boom, right there. Now you have a big hole in the mesh. And we're going to go over tools to kind of fix that later. And so now we have this kind of object. And we can bring in some more primitives as well with this top menu. In addition to that, so I just activated walk tool. If that ever happens to you, just press Alt-X and then you'll be out of it. Pretty useless tool. It disables all your controls. So we have a bunch of these objects in here, right? But say we needed like a few more of these. So if I press Control D, that's the hotkey for duplicate. And You could also just go here, but I'd really prefer you guys to learn hotkeys. And nothing, looks like nothing happened, but when I move this, there we go. We have two of these sort of box shapes now, and I can keep Control D'ing and dragging, Control D, drag, all of that. But these are just like free floating stuff, right? So if we go into let's go back in my modeling menu and then go into Mesh, Combine. Now you'll notice that when I click off and click on, it selects both of those at the same time. That's because they're one object. They're not one mesh because you can clearly see that there's a cut in there. And even if I go in here and I start moving these verts, and I'm just snapping these by holding V, I'm just snapping those to the verts. Even if I do this, they're still not one mesh, right? It visually looks like it, but as soon as I go in, and if I go into face mode and double click this, the secret is right there, you know? So if make sure that if you do this, if you line those up, make sure you go in and mesh, edit mesh, my bad, merge. And I'm just gonna press enter to accept that. And now, if I double click it, you'll see that it selected the whole thing, meaning that that is one mesh. It actually welded those verts together. There's a tool for that called target weld, but I'll go into that later. And so yeah, so that's duplicating. What you can also do is, let me duplicate this again and mesh, combine. So this is one mesh, or not one mesh. This is one object now, but it's still not one mesh, right? And the opposite. Say you wanted to remove this from the object and move it around as its own piece. What you do is mesh separate, and that only works if they're separate meshes. So it was not one continuous mesh. Like, we did not weld any verts together between these two. We didn't merge anything. We just combined. So it's important that you differentiate those two things. And so yeah, that's how you free that object. And that's pretty much it for components and duplicating and combining. Thanks for watching.